Okay, so I'll teach you now how to get the standard deviation using the JASP, since last time we ended our discussion with computing the standard deviation using the Excel. This time sa JASP, and then I'll just use any data ha. Example, I have this data, this data here. Ang gagawin ninyo if you are going to look for the standard deviation that is still found in the descriptives. Lag jud siya. Ani lang jud ang just patience is a virtue. Okay, and then yung data na numerical is yung entitled aware, so I'll just transfer it here under the variables, and as you can see, automatically it will give you a table with the mean, and take note, here's the standard deviation. So kasama na lahat dito for the descriptive, si standard deviation, si mean, and if we are going to include the other measures of variation, we have the range here. The range class is just the difference between the highest value and the lowest value. As you can see, the maximum value is given here, that's 5. The minimum value is 3.25. We will just subtract them and we will get the range here, and that's the 1.75. So that will just measure the distance between the highest value and the lowest value. And at the same time, you have there the most commonly used measure of standard deviation, that's the most commonly used measure of variation is the standard deviation. So for the set of data I have here, that's 0.473. Now, how do we analyze or interpret the numerical data here? If you have high value for the standard deviation, it means your data is not precise. They are not close with each other. They are not even close to the mean. So medyo malayo. They don't agree, class. The data don't agree with each other. And for research, we don't want that. Hinahanap ito ng mga panelists, ang standard deviation, just to see whether your collected data, marami yan siya. Most of you have respondents more than 100. So, kailangan, kasi, precise yung data ninyo. Nag-agree sila with each other even though magkaibang respondents yon. And ang pinaka-importante dito talaga yung mga experimental studies. You will have trials or replicates, and dapat yung results ng inyong trials for the same sample should also be precise. Okay? So malapit sila sa mean, malapit sila with each other. So mag-expect tayo, class, and even the panelists, mag-expect na we will have small value here for our standard deviation. So the process of doing that in the JASP is not really difficult. It's just that sometimes maglalag talaga yung laptop pag hindi niya kaya. Medyo mabigat kasi yung application. But nevertheless, the standard deviation is also found here under the descriptives. And when you are going to transfer the data here sa variables na column, automatically the software will give you the standard deviation. Or it will even give you the variance. The variance is the square of the standard deviation. So isa-square niya lang yan. 0.224 yung answer. Okay? So that's it for the JASP. Any question? I'll give you a recording of this baka hindi siya masundan again since medyo naglalag itong JASP ay yung laptop natin because of the software. You have questions? Again, let us summarize. When you say measure of central tendency, we will really locate the center of the distribution. Since we have lots of data from the experiment or from the survey, we will locate the center of that numerical data. And most of the time, we use the mean, especially for interval or ratio scale types of data. But if ever the mean cannot be a representative of the center of the distribution, that's the time we use the median and the mode. The median is literally the center of the distribution. Kasi you have to arrange your data from highest to lowest or vice versa, and you have to locate the center. Okay? And then the mode is the most repeated score for a given set of data. We use that for ordinal type of data or even nominal type of data. And then for the measure of variation, we are checking here whether the collected data are precise or not. So yun. And ang pinaka-ginagamit again is the standard deviation. The more na malaki yung computed standard deviation, the more na hindi precise yung na-collect nyo na data. So the ideal here is to get a small na standard deviation. So that's all for the descriptive na statistics. We will be moving on to inferential statistics, still using the JASP software. Okay, let me share this. Okay, so again, we will still be using the JASP software for our inferential statistics. When you say inferential statistics, we are using here critical judgment and critical analysis for us to draw a conclusion from our collected data. So we will be giving meanings to the numerical values. Okay. Now, for those who will be doing or who will be conducting survey, this is how you get the interval, how to get the mean range. So suppose you use this type of Likert scale, like in your questionnaire, you have there 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and these numbers correspond to verbal interpretations like 5 for strongly agree and 1 for strongly agree. During the interpretation, you will not be using strongly agree or strongly disagree. We will be getting the range, and then we will have a new set of interpretation here. Just like when your question is, what is the mean level of knowledge of the participants about COVID-19. Hindi ka naman pwedeng magsabi na if his or her answer is 5, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na ang mean level of knowledge nila is strongly agree. So definitely we will make a new interpretation for this. We just use this Likert scale for their answers sa questions ninyo or sa statements na binigay ninyo. So our formula to get the interval is highest scale minus the lowest scale divided by the number of scales. So if you use this one, you have 5 as the highest, 1 as the lowest. 5 minus 1 is 4. Divided by 5, it's 0.80. That's how you compute the interval. So pag magtali na tayo ng score ng inyong respondents, you will group them. Starting from 1, 1 plus 0.80, which is the interval. So you have here 1 to 1.80. So for example, we are talking about the level of knowledge. So if their score is 1 to 1.80, you may interpret this as very low. Very low yung knowledge nila. And then like after that, after 1.8, so you will start with 1.81 plus 0.80 na naman. So that's 2.60. Ito low lang. Basta mag-add ka lang. 2.60 plus 0.8. So dito ka na naman mag-end. 3.40. 3.40 plus 0.80. So starting from 3.41, mag-end ka sa 4.20. And lastly, for example, this is very high. So the interpretation, if they get the score between 4.21 to 5.0 is very high. They have very high level of knowledge to a certain phenomenon or occurrence. Yan yung pag-compute for the range or interval in the interpretation of the scores using the Likert scale. So magbabago ito depende class sa inyong questionnaire. So for example, you use 4 only. Tinanggal mo si neutral. So nag 1, 2, 3, and 4 ka lang. So 4 minus 1 divided by 4. Ganun yung magiging interval ninyo. Oh, 1 to 4 siya. Sige. So magiging 4 minus 1, that's 3 divided by 4. So the interval will be 0.75. So when you're going to make the interpretation, you will be starting with 1 to 1.75. So this will be like example very low. And then 1.76 plus 0.75. This will be hanggang 2.5. So this will be low. And then 2.51. 2.50 plus 0.75. 3.25. Okay. So this one becomes high now. And 3. Syempre, lang yung naiwan. 3.26 to 4. Okay, so this is how you are going to make the intervals for your interpretation pag meron na kayong data. Para masasagot mo talaga kung example, ang question nyo is, ngayon, yun nga, what is the level of knowledge? May sagot ka na. High ba, low, very low? Or anything na gusto nyong gamitin for the level of knowledge. Pero again, you cannot use this one for the interpretation. This is just used for the questions or the set of statements you included in your questionnaire to get their answers regarding sa topic ninyo. Sa interpretation, iba na siya. So I hope that's clear. Anything else? Any clarification? Okay na. Sige. Now, let's talk about inferential statistics. First, testing hypothesis about two independent groups. Okay? Look at your hypothesis. If your hypothesis or even your last question for the statement of the problem goes like this, is there a significant difference? Then, dito tayo mahuhulog. Again, isulat ko ha, is there a significant difference? But take note that this is only applicable for two independent samples, meaning you will have two variables na i-compare. So, pakitingnan yung SOP if merong, is there a significant difference between two variables only? Okay, example, difference between two variables, example, male and female medical technologists in terms of their knowledge on a certain topic. So dalawa lang yun, babae and lalaki. We will be using this two independent sample t-test. Take note of the name of the test. It's t-test. Specifically, two independent samples. Magkaiba, male and female. These are different respondents, lalaki lang lahat, and then ito, babae lang din lahat. So their answers have nothing to do with the other group. Okay? Now, itong t-test is a parametric test. I don't know if you have heard about that in your statistics na subject. But if nakalimutan na, let's have a review between parametric test and non-parametric test. Okay? So, si parametric test, before you can use this test class, kailangan we have to fulfill a lot of assumptions. Assumptions a lot of assumptions. Number one assumption that should be fulfilled is dapat yung collected data is normally distributed. Okay? Normally distributed. It means that if you are going to graph your collected data, you will get a bell-shaped graph in which if you are going to divide this into two, you will have two sides that are mirror image of each other. Okay? And you will have mean, median, and mode exactly at the center of the distribution. So normally distributed yung tawag dyan. If the data goes like this, if i-graph natin. Okay? Normally distributed. And then another one is there should be equality of variance. So remember the variance a while ago, I mentioned that the variance class is the square of the standard deviation. Again, the variance is the square of the standard deviation. And since we have two groups here, we have to fulfill also this assumption that the variances of the two groups are homogeneous or equal. Again, before we can use the parametric test. Actually, marami yan sila. And then, what else? The type of data. Type of data. The type of data here should be either interval or ratio scale. So yan yung mga some of the assumptions that we need to fulfill before we can use the parametric tests. If we cannot fulfill these assumptions, then we have to use the non-parametric test equivalent. Okay? So again, pag hindi yan na-fulfill, like not normally distributed yung data natin, and then there is no equality of variance, and then the type of data is either nominal or ordinal. Dito tayo sa non-parametric test. Okay? Now, the t-test is under the parametric test. Therefore, before you can really use that, you need to have a normally distributed data. There should be equality of variance, and your data should be interval or ratio scale. And aside from that, since this is a t-test, you will have two groups that are independent from each other. And then we are going to use the t-test if we are going to compare these two groups. That is why we use this. If your question for the SOP is there a significant difference? Okay? Sino dito yung may question sa SOP ng is there a significant difference? Sige daw. Let's see kung meron ba. O baka wala. Is there a significant relationship lang? Meron? Angeli, anong question nga ninyo? Ano daw? Paki-type na ng question.
Wait lang po, ma'am.
Okay, send lang ha. Next, since this is a parametric test, we will be using the mean as the center of distribution. And at the same time, for the measure of variation, we're going to use the standard deviation. Okay? So I will just skip this since we are done with our discussion about the null and the alternative hypothesis. Okay? Now, if you're going to do the manual computation of the t-test for independent samples, this will be the formula. And pagdaghan kayo mo og respondents, ugma pa ta mahuman aning computation. Kay isa-isahon man jud nato ni. Okay? So ito again, yung ating formula, x1 minus x2. x1 is the mean of the group 1. Diba? Kung may babae at saka may lalaki. And then, babae ito, for example, ang x1, x2 itong sa lalaki. We have to get the mean first. And then, divided by the square root of the SS1 is the sum of squares ng group 1 Isa-square muna natin lahat ng scores of the group 1 and then i-add natin. That's SS1. And SS2 is the sum of squares ng group 2. Divided by N1 is the sample size for group 1. Kung ilan lahat, kung 100 yan, ang respondents mo, 100 din dyan. And another 100 din sa N2. But nevertheless, I'm not going to require you na mag-manual computation of this. Since marami tayo masyadong data, okay lang sana kung tigli-5 lang yung data ninyo. Okay lang, kaya natin yan. We'll just get the mean, the squares of each group, and then the sample size, 5 lang. Pero pag masyadong marami yung ating data, lisod na ta. So we are going to use the software. Now, before we'll really move on to the application of the software, this is our decision rule. Take note, decision rule for our t-test. Number 1, we have to reject the null hypothesis if the p-value associated with the computed p-value is less than 0.5. Ano daw ibig sabihin nun? When we are going to use the software will give us the p-value. And what are you going to do? If the p-value is less than 0.05, your decision is you have to reject the null hypothesis. Look at your hypothesis there. I think naka-null yan lahat. So like there is no significant difference. Ganon. Okay? And pag less than 0.05, reject that null hypothesis. Okay? Meaning merong difference daw yung two groups mo. Pero if the p-value is more than 0.05, that's when you accept the null hypothesis. Summarize natin siya para mas madali yung inyong interpretation. Is there a significant difference in the level of knowledge, attitude, and practices before and after presentation of instructional video among the grade 6 pupils in General Santa City? Okay. Yes, ang question ninyo, is there a significant difference? Pero pala, hindi yan siya mag-fit in dito sa t-test, sa independent sample t-test. Bakit? Kasi yung una ninyo ng difference is before and after, right? So, paired siya dapat. Paired t-test ito. Hindi kasi sila independent. You have same sample here na mga grade 6 students. So, hindi ka parehas ng example ko kanina na iba yung sagot ng mga lalaki, iba din yung sa babae. Ito kasi lahat sila grade 6 students, tinest mo sila before giving the material. Then afterwards, nag-test ka ulit after. So yung scores nila is like connected, no, with each other. So the independent sample t-test is not applicable here. Nevertheless, I'll still teach you how to do the independent sample t-test. Okay? So let me just give you an example. Example lang ito, Hado Pharmacy kasi ito. A study was conducted by a group of fourth-year pharmacy students in a certain school to determine the level of male and female community pharmacist awareness on antimicrobial dispensing. A standardized survey questionnaire was adopted from an international research in 1 to 5 Likert scale. So what we are going to do here is to compare the level of awareness of the male and the female pharmacists. So these are independent samples. We have two groups only here. So most likely, independent sample t-test is used here. So yung independent variables natin, meron tayong dalawa for the sex, male and female. And then the outcome variable is their level of awareness, para mas specific. Level of awareness sa antimicrobial dispensing. And if you're going to check the possible statement of the problem or the research questions, we have here first asking for the level of awareness ng mga babaeng pharmacist, and then number 2, level of awareness ng mga lalaki naman. So yung kailangan lang natin dito na statistical tool or test for numbers 1 and 2 will be just descriptive statistics, meaning we'll just get the mean and the standard deviation. But for number 3, this is already inferential statistics because this is asking if there is a significant difference in the level of awareness on antimicrobial dispensing between sa lalaki and sa babaeng pharmacist. So, let's see the just on how are we going to do this. First, open natin yung ating data here. Ayan. So class, before tayo mag-just, pag meron na kayong results coming from your survey, you have to first encode that in the Excel. And ganito yung pag-encode nito. It doesn't matter kung nakapasunod ang babae at saka lalaki. As long as magkatugma yan, this score is coming from male number 1. Ito naman yung sa female number 2, for example. So one column will be their scores sa Likert scale sa questionnaire. Yung mean na lang ha, kasi diba you have a lot of statements sa questionnaire ninyo. And ang kukunin nyo here is for, it's the mean for all the respondents. So this time I have 40 respondents here. Halo-halo na. The second column will be their sex. Sex ng track, no track ang nakalagay dyan, but that's for the sexes, male and female. And then again, do not forget to save this file. Save as, sample dito. Save as natin siya as CSV, doon nakasave na kasi ito. CSV, delimited. Do not forget that kasi this will not be read by the just if hindi naka-CSV format. Now, let's look at the just. Okay? Okay, diba? Dito tayo mag-start open. And then, nilagay ko kasi yon sa research capability building, independent sample data set. Pag i-click mo yan, i-import niya yung data. So, ito na yon. The mean scores for the level of awareness and the track for the sex, male and female. Before you move on with the t-test class, before you move on with the t-test, you have to check first if tama yung type of data. So for the level of awareness, naka-scale yan siya. Though Likert scale yun, but remember that these are already the mean scores. So di ba sabi ko, pag mean scores na siya collected from your survey, magiging scale na siya. So tama itong scale, hindi na siya ordinal. Pero itong track, remember, we have no numerical data here, instead classification only, male and female. So tama din ito na naka-nominal. Okay? Now, let's do the t-test. As you can see sa taas, you have there the t-test. Click here and take note that we are doing independent sample t-test. Okay, independent sample sila. Iba yung babae, iba yung babae at saka lalaki. Now, later na, next time na tayo mag-discuss ng paired t-test para dun sa may paired t-test na testing. Though, isang, ano lang to sila, isang group, nasa baba lang si paired sample. Now, let's click independent sample t-test and then, the next thing that you're going to do is to transfer the columns here. Una, variables. Itong variables, ito yung outcome variable natin, which is the level of awareness. Ita-transfer mo siya dyan. Itong track naman, ito yung independent sample, independent variable natin or yung grouping natin, babae or lalaki. Dito mo siya ilagay sa grouping variables. Okay? Now let's wait for the just to compute. Ayan. So here is it now. the result of the independent sample t-test, you have there the t-score, that's negative 0.033. Later I'll if I still have time, I will discuss to you what do you mean by the t-score. And then the df is the degree of freedom. The degree of freedom is the number of data that can vary from each other. So ang ano kasi niyan, ang kanyang formula is df equals group 1 plus group 2 minus 2. Kasi dalawang group tayo dito. Meaning kung ilang numbers yung nasa group 1, example, meron doon 20 na babae and then 20 na lalaki. So that's 40 minus 2, that is why 38. Meaning there are 38 data that can vary from each other. That's the degree of freedom. But what we are looking here is the p-value. I have given you the decision rule a while ago. And ano sabi ko? If the p-value is, ano nga yun? Less than, where is the less than? Less than 0.05, you have to reject the null hypothesis. I'll just write HO. But if it's more than 0.05, you have to accept the null hypothesis. And let's look at the p-value. It's a 0.974. Meaning, mas malaki siya sa 0.05. Therefore, our decision here is to accept the null hypothesis. What's the null hypothesis? There is no significant difference between the level of awareness of the male and female pharmacist. So, hindi daw magkaiba yung level of awareness ng mga babae at lalaking pharmacist. That's how you do the t-test for independent sample. And that's how you interpret, class, the result of the test. So, it's the p-value. Okay? Now, you can also include the descriptives here. Actually, kahit hindi mo na pindutin itong descriptives dito, you can also place the descriptives here. And we just need the mean. So, the mean for male and female will also be given by the JASP if you click the descriptives here sa side. And then the standard deviation will also be given. So, automatic yan siya lahat. Now, we can also do assumption checks. Remember, di ba, t-test is a parametric test and kailangan ma-fulfill yung mga assumptions. Number 1, normality. We can also check whether our collected set of data is really normally distributed or not. Makasigurado lang tayo na tama yung paggamit natin ng t-test, ng independent sample t-test. So pag i-click mo itong normality, lalabas itong assumption check, the test of the normality or the Shapiro-Wilk test. Now, paano mo siya i-interpret? Para ito sa Shapiro-Wilk test ha, still we are going to look at the p-value, but this time, if the p-value is more than 0.05, that means your data is normally distributed. Otherwise, it's not. So, let's look at the result for both male and female. For female, that's 0.318. That's more than 0.05. So that means that the collected data for male is normally distributed. So we have fulfilled the first assumption. Now, para sa female, ay sa male pala, 0.390. That is still more than 0.05. So both groups, class, are normally distributed. So check, fulfill yung unang assumption. And then, the other one is equality of variance. You can also click that on the side, and it will also give you a p-value. This time, the test for equality of variances is called the Levene's test. Okay? Pero, how do we interpret this? Actually, parehas lang sila. P-value pa rin, And if it's more than 0.05, the data is homogeneous or merong equality of variance. So ano bang p-value dito? 0.498. That's more than 0.05. So yes, check din yung second assumption. There is also equality of variance. Therefore, for the collected data here, pwede talagang gamitin yung independent sample p-test. So we have here normality of the distribution and the quality of variance. And then yung ating data is interval. Naging interval na siya kasi we get the mean and hindi na yung individual scores for each statement or question. Pero ito yung independent sample p-test class ha. We are going to look at the p-value and this is how you are going to interpret the result of the p-test. So yung conclusion mo here, since this is more than 0.05, ang i-accept ko yung null hypothesis and then again, there is no significant difference sa level of knowledge of my two groups. So I hope na nasundan yun, or kung hindi mo nasundan, I'll just give you a copy of the recording. And I hope you learned something kahit konti lang yung time natin. You have learned something this evening regarding the first test for statistics, inferential statistics. That's the t-test. Okay? So do not forget how t-test is used if you have two groups na kino-compare mo. Two groups only. Kasi pag nagsobra na yan ng two groups, ibang usapan na yan. And this is independent sample t-test. So you have to make sure first that the two groups are independent from each other. You will have two sets of respondents that differ from each other. Iba yung sa grupo nila Angeli kasi isang set of sample lang yun. Lahat yun the same persons. Kaya paired sample t-test yung sa kanila and we will discuss that after the midterm exam. Okay, for the meantime, do you have questions or clarifications? Walay. Walay siya na. Or nagyod?